I hope you can hear me now. I'm just going to start by sharing a couple of anecdotes because they do help me to land. But the microphone is broken in my very old computer because I was driving up a hill one day and my boot flew open and my computer fell out of the back of my car. Clack, 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 clack down the road. I had to pull over. Actually, loads of stuff fell out. I had to pull over and collect it all. And one of the side effects of that journey for my computer was that it's broken the microphone. So I've got this swanky little thing here next to it, and I've forgotten to plug it in. So there you go. Ah, thank you. Thank you for to everyone who loves camp so much that they want to mark it in some way this year. Thank you. Thank you to everyone that works so hard to make our dreaming alive on that field year after year. It's been a huge resource in my life, an enormous resource, a real mark of a fork in the road for me. And I was saying that in the when you couldn't hear me, that this is my copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves, which I've had since I was 18. And I brought it to my first dance camp. I had it with me with my first dance camp. I arrived at my first dance camp dripping wet, absolutely lost, completely terrified and wild and completely straitjacketed. And I was at the sauna, and the sauna fire outside was going out, and I tore a page out of this book to get it lit because I felt like I'd the place where this book had met me was the place where camp had met me, and I just felt like it was a kind of ritual sacrifice, a ritual offering to the camp that just felt so sacred. And I know that we all feel that in our own way, in our own ways. So, calling in the elements for this session of story, calling in the earth so that this story is grounded, so that it's got that real edge to it, that we can really absorb it. We can absorb it right into our bodies, deep down into our roots, that it can nourish us totally. Calling in the air, that we can breathe this story in really deeply, that I don't forget to breathe, that my whispers and my shouts and my rants, that you're touched, that this story can be breathed deeply in and can sustain you, can fill your lungs, and that you can tell it and that you can share it, and that's the medicine of storytelling, the great medicine of storytelling, that we're all storytellers. That is the sound of the Arwen, which is the ancient sound of inspiration that the bards used to sound 3 times before they told a story. And I'll do it twice more before the story starts. But I'm calling in the fire, calling in the beautiful, imaginative, shining light of the sun, the roaring, crackling fires. I'm calling in the light and the medicine and the magic of all the fires of camp, in all the teepees, in all the tents, in all the places, outside and inside. I'm calling in the medicine of that fire. I'm calling in the medicines of the Beltane fires that we jump, of the fires that we've all told and listened to stories around for thousands and thousands of years. I'm calling in the fire. I'm really asking you to warm us, fire, and I'm really asking you to ignite us and give us energy for this harvest time, for this time where we can really recognize, give us the energy to recognize what our harvest is. Give us the energy to reach out and connect with people and let them know that they're important. Give us the energy to dance our soul dance. Ah. calling in the water. Sweet, sweet flowing water, magical, programmable water, thinking about all the water at camp, thinking about the estuary and thinking about the springs and thinking about the taps that you have to queue for and the taps that you don't have to queue for, thinking about the showers and thinking about the water there, thinking about the water slide, and I'm thinking about the water when it comes and it's been so hot and it's so refreshing on our body, and I'm thinking of the tipping point, the moment where we're like, is this rain going to keep coming? I'm thinking about you, water. I'm thinking about all that you clean and all that you clear and all that you carry. I'm thinking about all the incredible beings that are inside you. Like, wow, wee, wow. Some of those guys are amazing. Wow. Yeah, calling in all the creatures of the water too. Oh, I just want to sigh. Breathe out my day, breathe out our days. Once there was a poor motherless child who had no shoes. But she really, really wanted some. And she knew what she wanted. And she was at a camp. The wind has kind of blown her there on a stem of ragwort, and she found herself in a field with a load of other people that she was far too scared to talk to. It seemed quite nice. And she knew what she wanted to make. She wanted to make herself some shoes, and she'd heard that there was a place called the Creative Area. So she went up there, and there was a leather workshop, and there was a macrame workshop, and there was a felting workshop, and bit by bit she didn't join in any of the workshops. She was too scared. But bit by bit she took a little scrap from each workshop. And then when there was another little tent there, and when everyone had gone, she put her hand underneath it and she pulled out a few scraps, and she looked at them and she collected all the ones that were red, bright red, shining red, blood red, and she stitched them together. And she was no good at sewing really, and she had the wrong needle and the wrong cotton, but she didn't care. She didn't care because it was the first time she'd ever made anything, and she put her hand into those shoes that she was making, and she sewed, and one of them was a bit twisted at the front and one of them was a bit knobbly underneath, and when she walked you could feel that ridge underneath it, but she didn't care. She loved them. She loved them. She loved walking around camp in them. People liked them at camp. And she loved dancing with them, and she loved it. She loved, they got wet and they dried, and she wore them all the time. She wore them to bed, and they really, really, they were like her friends at camp. They were really great. And then came time, the closing circle, and everyone said their goodbyes to each other in their own dance campy ways, and she'd felt like she'd made some connections. And she walked out, and she didn't know what was next, but she felt nourished, and that was a really good thing. And she was walking along, and suddenly she hit the town, and she felt suddenly really grubby and really embarrassed, and she looked down at her shoes, and she felt really self-conscious in them. And as she was walking along, a gilded carriage came past, and an old woman looked out of that carriage. She said, "Child, what are you doing walking? You look so ragged. Come in." And so the girl stepped inside the carriage, and she was awed by the wealth in there. It had one of those kind of 8-speaker systems, so even though it looked like an ornate vintage carriage, there was like high quality music pumping out. And it was so smooth. The journey was so smooth, and it had tinted windows so that you could look out, but people couldn't look in. And when she stepped out of the carriage, people looked at her differently. They're like, oh, who's getting out of that carriage? And she liked it. She liked it very much. And what's more, the old woman said that she would look after her, said that she would take care of her, said that she wouldn't want for anything. And so she allowed that, and she went to bed that night at the old woman's house in the most amazing feather bed. And even though she'd had an amazing, brilliant time at camp, that first night in that bed with the clean white sheets, which she made quite dirty with her feet, was pretty special. But when she woke up in the morning, there were all these new clothes laid out at the front of the bed, and her handmade shoes were gone. She was sure she'd gone to bed wearing them, but someone must have taken them off in the night. And she went down and she asked the woman, she's like, where are my clothes? Where are my things? She went, oh, I burnt all those rags. You know, you've got no need to wear that kind of thing anymore. You can wear cashmere now. You can wear silk now. You can wear anything you like now. We will have it embroidered by the finest embroiderers for you. We will have it stitched so that it fits you immaculately. And, she said, you're going to come to church with me on Sunday, and we must get you a proper pair of shoes. And she did have some shoes, but they weren't quite well fitted. They were like clogs. So in these clogs, she went with the old woman to the shoemakers. And the old woman was very, very short of seeing. And on this journey, it was when the girl really realised this, because she would squint, and she was really relying on the girl's eyes to show her the way. So when the girl got to the shoemakers, and she said, I want you to get some sensible black shoes, like the clogs you've got on now, but more that fit you better. And the girl was like, okay. And she went to go in. It was one of those very old shops with a lovely little dingly bell on top when you open the door. And she was just about to make that lovely dingly bell sound with the door when she looked in the window. And the window was one of those kind of pushing out round windows. And in the centre of the window display was a pair of red shoes. They were cherry red. They were satin red. They were lipstick red. And they just dazzled her, and they just shone, and they shook her on the inside, and she wanted them. She wanted them. She wanted them. And she looked at the old woman and she thought, she's never going to notice. She's never going to notice. So when it came to the time for her to be served, she said, I'll have those ones. And the shoemaker looked at her and she just nodded. And so he wrapped them up, and the old woman looked and approvingly at them, and she had no idea that they were red. And they went home. And then the day came, the Sunday came, and they went to church. And everyone was just askance that she had the audacity to wear these shoes. I mean, they weren't just red, they were pointy and they were heeled. And that she wore them to, it was scandalous that she wore them to church. It was like everybody was just looking down at those shoes like, red shoes. It was as though even Mary and Jesus and the saints themselves were looking down at her disapprovingly. And surely it didn't take long for all of them to let the old woman know that she was wearing red shoes. And the old woman, she was disgusted, and she was like, that is not on, that is not okay, she said. And she took them away and she put them up on a high shelf. And on that high shelf they burned. And on that high shelf they called, and they wolf whistled, and they cackled and laughed, and they gave the girl no rest at all. the next Sunday. The girl put the red shoes on, and off she went to church with the old woman. I'm reading now from the book. At the door to the church was an old soldier with his arm in a sling. He wore a little jacket and had a red beard. He bowed and asked permission to brush the dust from the girl's shoes. The child put out her foot, and he tapped the soles of her shoes with a little wig-a-jig-jig song, and the soles of her feet began to itch. "Remember to stay for the dance," he said, and he smiled and he winked at her. And again everybody looked completely askance at her red shoes. But she so loved the shoes. They were crimson. They were bright like raspberries. They were bright like pomegranates. And she could hardly think of anything else. She wasn't even listening to the service. She was just looking at the way her shoes shone. She couldn't help but just keep looking down at them and moving her toes this way and that. And when the old woman and her left the church, the injured soldier called out, "What beautiful shoes! What beautiful dancing shoes!" And his words made the girl take a few little twirls here and there, and she thought to herself, I'll show him the dances I learned at camp. And she started to dance some of the dances that she learned. And as she danced them, she began to enjoy them more and more, and she danced, and she looked at him, and she danced. But it seemed as though she'd lost control. She tried to stop, but she couldn't. It was like they danced and danced and danced her, and she did a twirl, and she did a spin, and she did a jump, and the old woman's coachman, he jumped out from his bench and he ran after her and he picked her up and he carried her back to the carriage. But the girl's feet were still dancing even though they were in the air, and it was like they were dancing, they were still on the ground. The old woman and the coachman tugged and pulled, and they tried to pull off the shoes. It was such a sight, all hats and kicking legs. But at last the child's feet were calmed. Back home, the old woman slammed those red shoes back on that shelf again and said, "Never touch them again." Oh, but she couldn't help looking at them, and she couldn't help longing for them. It was like they were the most beauteous thing on the face of the earth. But not long after, as the woman would have it, the woman became bedridden, and as soon as the doctors left, the girl crept into the room where the shoes were kept. She glanced at them so high on the shelf. Her glance became a gaze, and her gaze became a powerful desire. So much so that the girl took the shoes from the shelf and fastened them on. "It'll do no harm," she thought. "Just a little dance, just a little movement." And she was so overcome with the urge to dance that she went out of the door and she danced. And she went down the stairs and she danced. And then she danced in a pirouette, and she danced in a tango, and she danced a salsa, and she danced a merengue, and she danced the waltz, and she just kept dancing faster and faster and faster. But then she wanted to go left, and her shoes, they wanted to go right, and she wanted to go this way, and she wanted to go that, and they danced her, and they danced her all the way through the fields and out into the dark and gloomy forest. And there, against a tree, was a man with a red beard. His arm was in a sling, and he was dressed in a little jacket. "Oh my," he said, "what beautiful dancing shoes!" And she tried to pull the shoes off, but as much as she tugged, the shoes stayed fast. But she had one foot on the ground, and it kept dancing, and it kept dancing, and it kept dancing. And so she danced over hills, and she danced through valleys, and in the rain and the snow and the sunlight she danced. And it was terrible dancing. It was a dance with no rest. It was a dance with no end. And she danced until she entered the churchyard. And there, the spirit of dread, they wouldn't let her go any further. They wouldn't let her come in. And the spirit pronounced these words over her: "You shall dance in your red shoes until you become like a wraith, like a ghost, till your skin hangs from your bones, till there's nothing left of you but your entrails dancing. You'll dance from door to door and village to village, and you'll strike each door 3 times, and people will peer out and they will see you, and they will hope that they will never have the fate that you have for themselves. Dance in your red shoes. You shall dance." And the girl begged for mercy, But before she could plead further, her red shoes carried her away. Over the briars she danced, through the streams, over the hedgerows, on and on. Now the old woman who had taken her in had died. There were mourners. She was outside the house, and there they were carrying out her body. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't mourn. She couldn't pay her respects. She danced on and on and on, and she was exhausted and she was horrified, and she kept on dancing. And she danced into the forest where the town's executioner lived, and the axe on the wall began to tremble as soon as it sensed her near. Please, she begged the executioner as she danced by his door, please, cut off my shoes to free me from this horrid fate. And the executioner cut through the straps. And still the shoes stayed on her feet, and so she cried to him that her life was not worth living. Cut off my feet, she cried, cut off my feet. And so he cut off her feet. And through the forest, the dancing shoes kept going. And through the forest, her feet in the dancing shoes kept going. And now the girl was a poor cripple, and she had to find her own way in the world as a servant to others. And she never, ever again wished for the red shoes. So we're just breathing. I'm just breathing this story in. It's like a slap in the face story, a wake up story, a cautionary tale. If you do this, then your life will be like this story. And I'm going to go through some of the ways that CPE, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, has talked about this story, because I worked with her in Colorado a couple of years ago, and she was really clear: you may not tell my stories unless you talk about the transformational process of the stories. That is the only way I'll give you permission to do these stories. So in honour, and I think it's really good work and important work, I'm going to talk a little bit about what she said and about how in my years of working with these stories in different ways, they've touched me and lived through me and worked me. So I chose this story, or it chose me. I always knew I was going to do it, and it's not one I tell the most out of this book, and it feels like it's bloody enough and shocking enough. There are some places that you can tell it and lots of places that you can't, and the Moon Lodge is a place that I can tell it. So I really thank you. I really thank you, Clarity, for setting up the Moon Lodge in the first place, and I really thank you, Joan, for your vision for the field, and I really thank all the women that have set it up and that have worked in it, all the women that have put any workshops in it, and I really thank you, Naomi, for bringing it forward right now. So this story is about a woman, a girl, who has been unable to complete an attempted transformation. So she's starting off really well here. She's made her own red shoes, and she loves them. Yeah, and they're rough around the edges. But if she made another pair and another pair and another pair, then she would get better. And if she just carried on, if she was just left alone to carry on in the way that she was going, she would be able to really lift up a good life for herself. And I was telling the story the other day and talking about this story the other day, and Melissa Holloway, who's another fantastic storyteller that's told many stories and woven many baskets at camp, was saying that the instruction of how to live a good life is in the beginning of this tale. And it's right. This, she collects little bits from here and there, and she sews them together as best as she can, and then she wears them. Like, she really brings them really close to her, and she dances in them, and she walks in them, and she loves them. And that's the instruction to how to make a juicy handmade life. And the story doesn't end there, because it's about how a meaningful life can be pried away, seduced away, unless we carry on knowing our basic worth and keeping in touch with our wild joy. And we know it. You know, we know what nourishes us. I mean, I one of my, I'm going to give you 3 invitations in this story, and one of my invitations is to write down all the things that give you joy, what brings you joy, so that you've got a checklist, an aha list, so that you can go to it when you're feeling like, I don't know, you know, I think Noah said to me about 10 times today, I'm bored, you know, I don't know what to do. And so we can hijack ourselves in that way and then go to kind of things that aren't so nourishing for us. And there are places in us that are starving. That's for sure. There are places in me that are starving. And it's really, really hard if those places are starved to feed them what they need, because we don't know what it looks like. You know, how seductive is chocolate over lettuce? But actually, when we've been feeding ourselves really well with nourishing foods, something else clicks in and we go after them and we want them and we feel not well without them. But this place is starved. This is a place this is a girl that has been starved. It's an aspect of us that is starved. I keep saying it. And she will accept any substitute that is offered. So when the gilded carriage comes up, the gilded cage, the golden cage, she doesn't notice the trap. She doesn't notice that it is a trap. And for sure, we have all stepped in to those gilded carriages. And we haven't noticed how dried up that person inside the carriages. We haven't noticed how they are needing to live through us. They are needing us more, perhaps, than we need them. And you know, I'm really living that. I've really been living that in my own life, where I was living in someone else's house, really feeling like I could bring myself. But she says this. I might not be able to find it, but when I find it, I'll read it to you. But basically, it's on the lines of that we have to take on whoever is their owner. We have to know what their essence is, because in we are sort of subserving to that. So we will somehow become that. You know, it's like in the tales of Baba Yaga and Vasilisa. You know, Vasilisa has these meetings with Baba Yaga, this filthy, disgusting, wild witch, and some of that medicine belongs to her. You know, she stands in it, and she stands in it well, so she can one day own some of that medicine. But what happens in this tale is that she dries out, and she snatches and obsesses instead of really going on a path of nourishment. And so she talks about CPE, backtracking and repair. She talks about picking up these drop stitches of our life, that it's never too late to do the really good work of picking up these dropped stitches in our life. And that we can have a reunion with ourself, a reunion with our wild soul. And she says that when you start to give away your wild life, that you lose your accurate perception. Yeah, that is so disorientating. You've given away your accurate perception. So let's remember that when we're going for something we know it's not healthy for us. I think it'd be useful to say, am I willing in this moment to give away my accurate perception in order to receive this? And she talks about failing. She talks about, you know, it's all laid out to her on a plate. And that's what's so attractive about stepping into the gilded carriage, because there's no possibility of failure, because we're stepping under the wing of someone else. And she says that don't waste any time hating a failure. Failure is a greater teacher than success. Learn from it, listen from it. And when we learn about these deteriorative patterns, these addictive patterns, that we can go on, because then we can sense the traps and the baits and the cages that will come for us in the future. So she talks about the girl being poor and innovative, and she talks about her being her psychic existence, bringing about a passionate life of her own design, and she talks about her resourceful feminine nature in day-to-day life. And I'm dreaming that phrase, where is my resourceful feminine nature today? And she talks about the symbol of the shoes, about the name of them, about the sayings of being well heeled, and that if we're well heeled, we've got good shoes, and that they're a metaphor for protecting and defending what we stand on, which obviously is our feet, and that our feet sense everything, And she says that life and sacrifice go together. Yeah, life and sacrifice go together. If you want to create, you have to sacrifice superficiality, some security, and often your desire to be liked. That's pretty true, I would say. And that she talks about the red of the red shoes that she's choosing in the shop being blood loss, like hemorrhaging kind of blood. They're not a kind of juicy menstrual blood. They're this kind of blood leakage. And she talks about it becoming a yearning, an obsession, and an addiction. And it's because that yearning and that obsession and that addiction comes from her shoes being burned. That's the moment that's set up. It's not the moment when she sees the shoes. She would have fixated on something else. Yeah. Because she's living a life without meaning. And so she's going for cheap thrills, sex without soul, things that offer her immediate comeback, immediate thrill. I'm just looking for, because it would take me forever to read all of this, but I just want to give you the parts that have really touched me. So yeah, this is the bit about the gilded carriage. If we remove ourselves from our real and passionate lives and enter the gilded carriage of the dry old woman, in effect, we adopt the persona and ambitions of the brittle old perfectionist. Then, like all captured creatures, we fall into a sadness that leads to an obsessive yearning, often characterized as a restlessness with no name. Thereafter, we are at risk of seizing the first thing that promises to make us feel alive again. And that reminds me of being in playgroup with Noah when he was little, and there was a woman there, and she was sitting there, and she was saying, I'm going to do a PhD. It's going to be hard work, and it's in Cornwall. I live in Somerset, and it's in Cornwall, so it's going to be a real drive. And I said, be careful, really loudly and really in her face. I said, be careful, because I've fallen into the trap before of doing something like that just because I feel like mothering has got absolutely no worth whatsoever. And she started to cry, this woman, and like an hour later she was still crying. And then her husband had to come and pick her up. It was like somewhere that had just hit the nail on the head for her, that she was doing this kind of massive thing to try and find meaning in her life. And I think that as well about sailing across the Atlantic, that I was just so desperate for to meet myself somewhere and to find an identity for myself that I could understand or something. And she talks about surrendering our personal creative joy to a cremating fire rather than a fire that is of our own making and keeps us really warm. And that all she wants, all she wants, all we want, all I want is my deep life back. I just want my deep life back. I want my deep life back. What a prayer. What a prayer. What a prayer to pray, to set up an altar every day and just to call for our deep lives back, to light a fire at every ritual. Call. I'm calling for my deep life back, Great Spirit. I'm calling for my deep life back, Great Mother. I'm calling for our deep lives back. It's all she wants. It's all we want. It's all I want is my deep life back. Yeah. And one of the icky, yucky parts, stepping stones towards getting our lives back, and this is my second invitation to you, is to confess that we have needs, that I have needs, that you have needs, that you're a woman and you have needs. Needy. It's just such a criticism, you know, so we take it all on and we pretend that we're strong, and then we collapse, then we pick ourselves up again, and then we keep going, and then we collapse, and then we're really angry and we don't get the support we need, and then we, you know, blah blah. It's a cycle. And it's like, let's all say it now. I have needs. Let's, after 3, let's say, I am a woman and I have needs. 1, 2, 3. I am a woman and I have needs. So that's my second invitation to you, to write what brings you joy, what brings you nourishment, and also what are your needs? What do you need? And I dare you to say them out loud. I dare you to share them with people. And I dare you to feel that expectation, that hunger, that desperation, or if it comes up, for them to be met. And what it builds up in other people around your expectations for them to be met, and then your disappointments, and what a journey that is, what a massive journey that is for all of us. And I know, Lizzie, if you're watching, it's like I have a pattern, you know, where I can really let my sister see my needs, so she ends up supporting me an awful lot. And I'm really deeply, deeply, deeply grateful, Lizzie, deeply grateful. Yeah. So she talks about being stuck, about this being another way of being stuck, about because of this disorientation about our soul life slipping away, that we can't even recognize our own needs because we're so disorientated. Our fight or flight instinct is totally fucked up, and actually she says drastically slowed or extincted, she doesn't say fucked up. And that recognizing of the sensations of satiation, off taste, suspicion, caution, and the drive to love fully and freely are inhibited or exaggerated. I'm going to read that bit again because it's just gold. Okay. The recognition of the sensations of satiation, like to be satisfied, to know when you've had enough. Off taste, to know when something's a bit off, a bit funny, a bit not right. Suspicion, caution, and the drive to love fully and freely are inhibited or exaggerated. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. It's just so true. It's so true. It's so true. Listen, I've read this book 1,000 times and I just read it sometimes and I'm like, you know, I'm sure some people get that kick out of the Bible, but I get that out of this. Yeah, so she goes to the shoes. She goes to the shoe shop, and she sneaks. She starts to sneak her life. She starts to sneak a life for herself, a soul life to herself, yeah, because she's so suppressed. She's so suppressed. Who knows that? Who's got a little secret life? Who's got a little secret? Whose actual soul self is tucked away in a corner somewhere, you know? all the women I know live their soul life in that way. Yeah, let's just imagine. Let's know for ourselves that place now. Okay, whether it's the little altar or the thing that's really us, that we know is really us, whether it's a piece of clothing or something that we cook, but we barely ever bring it out because it's not quite, we don't think it's gonna be appreciated, probably. Yeah, and let's just like a little bit of wind just blow on it and make it bigger. Just imagine it expanding. Yeah, get a little bit of fire underneath it so that it's got that energy to move and colour and vibrancy. Yeah, let's see it expanding. Okay, and let's get people round our table that are really going to appreciate what we bring. You know, and yeah, it's a journey. I mean, I've got a son who said, I paid him to read a story. I paid him to read a story, and he said, yeah, it's good. It's quite good. He said, I mean, it's got loads of you in it. It's like we're going to have to stand in that too and keep coming through with our glory, with our wonder, with our magnificence, with our ideas. They're radical, actually. They're absolutely radical. And so she talks about the place where a woman says, I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. And that is death. Yeah, that is death. And that always reminds me of one of my other favourite books, which is A Year of Marvellous Ways by Sarah Winman. And there's this moment where this young woman, she sleeps with a guy, and in the morning he says, what would you like to do? And she says, I want you to, she doesn't say this, she thinks this, okay? She thinks this, she's like, I just want you to fuck off. I want you to just leave. I want you to just disappear. And I want to ask the woman upstairs, because she's got a bath, and this girl hasn't got a bath. I want to ask the woman upstairs if I can use her bath and just have a bath. And I just want to lie in the bath forever, and I just want a day to myself. I just want some time to myself. That's all I want. And she doesn't say that. She says, let's go for a walk. So they end up going for this walk, and they go for a walk, and they go to the beach, and she just walks out into the waves, and she just walks out until her head's under and she drowns. And me, that's just like, just because it's easier for her, it was easier for her to just walk out to the sea and kill herself than it was to actually say, just give me some space. And CPE calls this inwardly hemorrhaging, which I think is a brilliant Moon Lodge image. And she says that you can call it what you like, but sneaking a life is really hard on your vitality. And that she talks about captured and starving women sneaking books and sneaking music and sneaking friendships and sneaking sexual feelings and sneaking spirituality and sneaking furtive thinking and sneaking dreams of revolution. They sneak time away from their mates and time away from their families. They sneak treasures into the house. They sneak writing time. They sneak many things. They sneak into the bedroom. They sneak a poem before work. They sneak a skip or an embrace when no one's looking. And it never works, and it blows up in your face when you are least expecting it. Yeah, it is going to blow up in your face, but it's not linear. Okay, so that's the scary thing. All right. And so she talks about Janis Joplin. She talks about Janis Joplin just not knowing when to, how to say no, just like, she just had no boundaries. She was so wild. She had no boundaries, and how she's like that she's got to that point where she's just dancing. She can't stop. She's so out of control. And she talks about being off in romanticism, off in La La Land, off in a dream world. There's really good dreaming, and there's really important dreaming, and there's fantasy. Yeah, and it's really important to know the difference, because the good dreaming, the mugwort dreaming time, can source our creativity, can source our soul lives forever. And the fantasying, You know, like the little match girl, she's more and more matches, fantasy after fantasy after fantasy, instead of using the matches to light the fire underneath her. I'm going off on one now, but that's just because I'm so passionate about these stories and what they're trying to tell us. Yeah. So, when a woman is unconscious about her starvation, about the consequences of using death dealing vehicles and substances, she is dancing. She is dancing. There can be negative thinking, poor relationships, abusive situations, drugs or alcohol. They're like red shoes. They're hard to pry a person away from them once they've taken hold, you know. It's addiction, it's addiction, it's addiction. And addiction begins when a woman loses her handmade and meaningful life and becomes fixated upon retrieving anything that resembles it in any way she can. Yeah? We have a drink because it softens our bodies a little bit, you know? We have a smoke because it just helps us to connect. You know, we have a bit of with a guy that we know is not really going to honour us because it makes us feel something, because we want to feel something, you know. And then we try and take the shoes off. Yeah, when we're in, when we've jumped, when we've drunk, then we're like, oh, it's too late. It's too late. Yeah, we've got to chop off the shoes from the ankle, sever, you know, and that is the hard bit to digest in this story. Okay, and so that's the third invitation that I have for you, is to write the next bit. Yeah, she's chopped her feet off, she's crawling, she's humble, and her feet are going to grow back, you know, her feet are going to grow back, and she's going to craft exquisite shoes for them, and she's going to hold on to her creativity, and she's going to hold on to her soul. Yeah. And so when you go to bed tonight, dream the end of this story. If you're a writer, write the end of this story, sing the end of this story, think about the end of this story in the bath, your end of this story. Yeah, they grew back. And that's what's so important about this book. When I was working with CPE, one of the first things she said, I wrote this book in a universal code. And if you go through it in the order that the stories were written, in the order that the book was written, that it is a map for the healing of the female psyche. Yeah. And of course, one of the last stories in this book, of course, it's fucking arrogant, you know, like, of course. Sorry. Sounded like then, I just felt like I sounded like the worst twat I've ever learnt anything from. Anyway, is The Handless Maiden. Yeah, which is like a long, big, juicy story with clear dreaming instructions into how to gain back over time, how to regrow our limbs. So if you feel moved to, my invitation is that you read that story as well. So I've kind of suggested, that we write lists of things that that nourish us, that bring us joy. I've done this with loads of women. No one has ever said Facebook. I've just flagged that one up. And my second thing, it was to I can't remember. Maybe one of you can write in the comments, or maybe you can remember. And the third thing was to rewrite this story, not to rewrite the story, but to write the next chapter of this story where she begins to grow herself back. Yeah, because it'll be really, really, that's one of the ways that we can backtrack and repair, is to write an ending that didn't happen, write a story that didn't happen. 49 minutes and 26 seconds. That's great, because I told Noah I'll be 50 minutes. That's cool. I thought I might go on to dance camp time and be a lot longer. Blessings, 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 blessings to our souls, blessings to our evolution, blessings to the place that just wants to keep learning and wants to feel nourished. Bless you all. Bless your hearts, bless your wombs, bless your fucking cunties. And thank you to the earth, and thank you to the air, and thank you to the water, and thank you to the fire, and thank you to CPE for this amazing book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. Thanks.